The flour sack sat on the porch like a silent promise, dusted with snow that had fallen during the night, and Priscilla Hammond stood in the doorway staring at it as though it might vanish if she blinked. She had 4 children sleeping in the room behind her, their bellies still hollow from yesterday's thin soup, and she had been awake since, before dawn, trying to figure out how to make nothing stretch into something. The war had taken her husband 2 years ago, a letter arriving long after his body had been buried in some Tennessee field she would never see. And now, winter had settled over Independence, California, with a cruelty that matched her circumstances. She stepped onto the porch, her bare feet immediately regretting the contact with frozen wood, and lifted the sack with trembling hands. It was heavy, full, more flour than she had seen in months. Monday morning light was just beginning to creep over the Sierra Nevada, painting the snow-covered town in shades of gray and pink. Priscilla carried the flour inside and set it on the kitchen table, her mind racing through possibilities she did not dare believe. Someone had left this. Someone new. The thought made her skin prickle with a mixture of gratitude and shame, because she had worked so hard to hide their desperation from the neighbors, from the shopkeepers, from everyone who might look at her with pity. Her eldest daughter Margaret was 10. Then came Thomas at 8, the twins Sarah and Samuel at 6, and keeping them fed and warm and alive had become her entire existence since Daniel died. She heard stirring from the bedroom and quickly moved to build up the fire, coaxing the embers back to life with practiced efficiency. The wood supply was running low too, another problem she would need to solve, but right now she had flour. She could make biscuits. The children would have something warm in their stomachs. Margaret appeared first, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her thin face lighting up when she saw her mother already working at the stove. "Mama, what are you making?" "Biscuits, sweetheart. We are having biscuits for breakfast." "Really?" The hope in Margaret's voice cut through Priscilla like a knife. When had biscuits become a luxury worth getting excited about? She forced a smile and nodded, mixing the flour with the last of their lard and a pinch of salt. The twins tumbled out next, always together, always moving like 2 parts of one creature. Thomas followed, quieter than his siblings, his eyes too old for his 8 years. He had taken his father's death the hardest, had stopped being a child that day and tried to become the man of the house. Though Priscilla wished desperately, he did not feel that burden. They ate the biscuits slowly, savoring each bite, and Priscilla told them a story about their grandmother while they chewed. She was good at stories, at making their small, cramped house feel less like a prison and more like a world full of possibilities. After breakfast, she bundled them in every layer they owned and sent them out to play in the snow while she tried to sort through what needed to be done. The flour would last maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. Then what? She had sold everything of value except Daniel's pocket watch, which she kept hidden in her dress pocket, pressed against her heart like a talisman. The week passed in a blur of survival. She took in mending from Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, her fingers working by candlelight long after the children slept. She watered down the soup until it was barely more than broth. She smiled and sang and pretended everything would be fine, because that was what mothers did. And when Monday morning came again, there was another flour sack on the porch. This time Priscilla did not go back inside immediately. She stood on the porch and looked out at the quiet street, at the other houses with their smoke curling from chimneys, at the mountains beyond holding their eternal watch. Someone was doing this. Someone was keeping them alive. She needed to know who. The third Monday, she woke before dawn and positioned herself at the window, watching through a gap in the curtain. The cold seeped through the glass and into her bones, but she did not move. She would wait all day if she had to. The town began to wake around her, people emerging to start their daily routines, but no one approached her porch. Then, just as the sun broke over the mountains, she saw him. He was tall, moving with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, wearing a heavy coat and a hat pulled low against the cold. He carried the flour sack like it weighed nothing, climbed her porch steps without a sound, set it down gently, and turned to leave. Priscilla was out the door before she could think about it, her feet hitting the frozen porch with a slap that made him spin around. For a moment, they just stared at each other. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind but not yet hardened by too many years. His eyes were blue, startlingly bright against his tanned skin, and they widened slightly when he saw her. "I wanted to thank you," Priscilla said, her breath coming out in white clouds, "for the flour, for everything." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "It is nothing, madam, I just had extra. Every Monday for 3 weeks is not nothing." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware she was standing outside in her nightgown and a shawl. "What is your name?" "Thomas. Thomas Parker." He touched the brim of his hat. "I work at the Patterson Ranch up north of town. I am Priscilla Hammond." "These are my children's lives you have been saving, Mr. Parker." The words hung between them, too heavy and too honest. Thomas looked down at his boots, then back at her face, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Your husband was Daniel Hammond. I heard about him." "I am sorry for your loss, madam. Thank you." The words were automatic now, worn smooth by repetition. "But why? Why are you doing this?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was low and rough. "My mother was widowed when I was 7. I had 3 younger sisters. That winter was the hardest thing I have ever lived through, and the only reason we survived was because a neighbor left food on our porch. I swore when I was old enough to help someone else, I would. When I heard about your situation, I just thought I should do something." Priscilla felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She did not cry in front of people. She did not fall apart. But standing here in the cold dawn with this stranger who had been keeping her family alive, she felt something crack inside her chest. "I do not know how to repay you. I do not want repayment." He took a step back, already retreating. "I should go. I am glad I could help, Mrs. Hammond." "Wait." She did not know what she wanted to say, only that she could not let him leave like this. "Would you like to come for supper sometime? The children should meet the person who has been so kind to us." Thomas hesitated, and she could see him weighing the offer, considering the implications. Finally, he nodded. "That would be nice, madam. Thank you. Sunday evening around 6. I will be here." He tipped his hat again and walked away, and Priscilla stood on the porch until he disappeared around the corner. Then she picked up the flour sack and went inside, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities she was not ready to name. Sunday came with clearer skies and a break in the snowfall that had the whole town feeling lighter. Priscilla spent the day cleaning the house with a thoroughness born of nervous energy, and the children picked up on her mood and peppered her with questions. "Who is coming for supper, Mama?" Sarah asked for the 10th time. "A friend, someone who has been very kind to us." "Is he nice?" Samuel wanted to know. "Very nice." Thomas arrived exactly at 6, cleaned up and carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. The children clustered around Priscilla as she opened the door, 4 pairs of curious eyes studying the stranger on their porch. "Mr. Parker, please come in." "Children, this is Mr. Thomas Parker. He works at the Patterson Ranch." "You can call me Thomas," he said, crouching down to be at eye level with the twins. "And you must be Sarah and Samuel." "How did you know?" Sarah asked, delighted. Your mama told me about you, and you are Margaret and you are Thomas too." Young Thomas nodded solemnly. "I was named after my papa." The older Thomas's expression softened. "That is a good name to carry." He handed the parcel to Priscilla. "I brought some honey, thought the children might like it." "That is very generous, thank you." She led him inside, acutely aware of how small and shabby their home must seem. The furniture was old and worn, the walls bare except for one tintype of her and Daniel on their wedding day. But Thomas did not seem to notice or care. He sat at the table where she directed him, and answered the children's endless questions with patience and good humor while she finished preparing the meal. Supper was simple but filling. Venison stew that Thomas had brought the previous week, along with biscuits made from his flour and potatoes she had managed to trade for. The children ate with enthusiasm, and Priscilla found herself relaxing as the evening wore on. Thomas told stories about working on the ranch, about horses and cattle and the mountains, and he made the twins laugh with his imitation of a stubborn mule. Margaret watched him with cautious interest, and young Thomas was quiet but attentive. After the children were in bed, Priscilla and Thomas sat at the table with cups of weak tea, the fire crackling in the stove. The house felt different with another adult in it, less lonely somehow. "They are good children," Thomas said. "You have done well with them." "I am trying. Some days it feels impossible." "I know that feeling." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "After my father died, my mother used to sit up at night trying to figure out how to make things work. I would hear her crying sometimes, though she never let us see. I always wished I could do something to help, but I was just a child." "How old were you when things got better?" "Took a few years. My mother found work at a bakery in town, and I started doing odd jobs as soon as I was big enough. My sisters all married eventually, settled down. My mother lived to see her grandchildren, which made her happy." He paused. "She passed 3 years ago. Heart just gave out one day. I am sorry." "Thank you, but I am grateful for the time we had. She was a strong woman like you." Priscilla felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I do not feel strong most days. I feel like I am barely holding on." "That is what strength looks like sometimes, just keeping going when everything says to give up." He met her eyes across the table. "You are doing more than surviving, Mrs. Hammond. You are keeping your family together, keeping them safe and loved. That matters." Something in his words, or maybe in the way he looked at her, made Priscilla's breath catch. She had not talked to another adult like this since Daniel died, had not had someone see her as anything more than the poor widow woman who needed charity. Thomas saw her as a person, as someone worthy of respect and kindness not born of pity. "Would you like to come again?" she asked quietly. "For supper, I mean. It is nice to have company." "I would like that very much." They established a routine after that. Every Monday morning Flower appeared on her porch, and every Sunday evening Thomas came for supper. The children grew comfortable with him, and Priscilla found herself looking forward to those evenings with an anticipation that felt dangerous. She was a widow. She was supposed to be mourning. But Daniel had been dead for 2 years, and she was only 28 years old. And the way Thomas smiled at her made her remember she was still a living woman with a beating heart. Winter deepened. Snow piled up in drifts against the house, and the wind howled down from the mountains with teeth made of ice. But they had Flower, and Thomas started bringing other things too. Firewood, which he stacked neatly by the door without mentioning it, vegetables from the ranch stores, once a chicken already plucked and cleaned. Priscilla tried to protest, but he waved her off. "The ranch has plenty. Mr. Patterson is a good man, pays fair, and does not mind me taking extra for folks who need it. Still, I feel like I am taking advantage." "You are not." He looked at her seriously. "Priscilla, You would do the same for someone else if you could. I know you would." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. They were standing on her porch in the late afternoon, the children playing in the snow nearby, and for a moment the rest of the world seemed very far away. "I wish I could do something for you in return," she said softly. "You already are. You let me be part of your family, even just a little. That is more than enough." Their eyes held, and Priscilla felt the pull between them like a physical thing. She took a step back, her heart hammering. "I should get the children inside before dark." "Of course." Thomas tipped his hat, but his eyes were still on her face. "I will see you Sunday." That night, after the children were asleep, Priscilla sat by the fire and let herself think about things she had been pushing away for weeks. She was drawn to Thomas in a way that scared her. He was kind and steady and good with her children, and when he looked at her, she felt something wake up inside that she thought had died with Daniel. But was it too soon? What would people say? What would Daniel think if he could see her now feeling this way about another man? She pulled his pocket watch from her dress and opened it, looking at the tintype inside. Daniel smiled back at her, forever young, forever frozen on their wedding day. She had loved him completely, had built a life with him, had given him 4 children. But he was gone, and she was still here, and she did not know how to navigate this new territory of grief and guilt and wanting. Sunday came with a fresh snowfall that made the world look clean and new. Thomas arrived with his arms full of packages, and the children squealed with excitement when he started unpacking them. There were peppermint sticks, one for each child. There was a small bag of real coffee, a luxury Priscilla had not tasted in months. There was a book of fairy tales, slightly worn but still beautiful, that made Margaret's eyes go wide with wonder. "Thomas, this is too much," Priscilla protested. "It is almost Christmas. I wanted the children to have something special." He pulled out one more small parcel and handed it to her. "And this is for you." Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. Inside was a pair of knitted gloves, thick and warm in a deep blue that matched her eyes. "I noticed yours were full of holes," Thomas said quietly. "I asked Mrs. Patterson to make these. I hope they fit." Priscilla put them on. They fit perfectly. She looked up at Thomas and saw her own feelings reflected in his face, longing and hesitation and hope all tangled together. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The children were occupied with their peppermint and the book, and for a moment it was just the two of them standing by the fire, close enough to touch. Thomas reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Priscilla, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I did not start bringing you flour just because of my mother or because I wanted to help a widow. I mean, those things are true, but they are not the whole truth." He took a breath. "I saw you in town last fall before the snow came. You were with your children, and one of them said something funny and you laughed, and I thought you had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. I asked around and found out you were widowed, struggling. I wanted to help, but I also wanted an excuse to be near you. Is that terrible?" Priscilla's heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst. "No, it is not terrible. I know it is too soon, and I know you loved your husband, and I am not trying to replace him. But I care about you, Priscilla. I care about your children. And if there is any chance that someday you might feel the same way about me, I am willing to wait as long as it takes." She looked at him, this man who had been keeping her family alive all winter, who had shown up every Monday without fail, who made her children laugh and treated her with respect and kindness. She thought about Daniel and the love they had shared, and she knew in her heart that he would not want her to be alone forever. He had loved her too much to wish that for her. "I already do feel the same way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and that terrifies me." Why? Because I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to let someone in again, how to trust that it will not all fall apart. I am scared, Thomas. I am scared too. He took her hands in his, gloves and all. But maybe we can be scared together. Maybe we can figure it out as we go. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises you are not ready for. I am just asking if I can keep coming around, keep being part of your life and see where this goes. Yes, Priscilla said, and it felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. Yes, I would like that. Thomas smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made her insides flutter, and squeezed her hands gently. Behind them, Sarah called out that she wanted her mother to read from the new book, and the moment passed, but something fundamental had shifted between them. Christmas came cold and bright. Priscilla and the children went to church in the morning, bundled in every warm thing they owned, and she found herself grateful in a way she had not been in a long time. They had food. They had warmth. They had Thomas, who was becoming part of their daily lives in ways that felt natural and right. After services, he appeared at their door with a small pine tree he had cut from the mountains, and they spent the afternoon decorating it with paper chains the children made and strings of popcorn Priscilla had saved. It was the first time Christmas had felt like something worth celebrating since Daniel died. That evening, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Priscilla sat by the tree and talked in low voices. He told her about his childhood, about growing up poor but loved, about learning to work with horses and finding his place at the Patterson Ranch. She told him about meeting Daniel at a church social when she was 18, about building their life together, about the grief that had nearly swallowed her whole when he died. "I thought I would never feel whole again," she admitted. "And maybe I will not exactly the way I was before. But being with you, it is like finding pieces I thought were lost forever." "You are whole on your own," Thomas said. "That is one of the things I admire most about you. You did not need me to save you. You were already saving yourself. But I needed help. There is no shame in that, is there?" "None at all. We all need help sometimes. That is what makes us human." He reached out and took her hand, and this time she did not pull away. They sat together in the flickering firelight, the tree casting strange shadows on the walls, and Priscilla felt something like peace settle over her. This was not what she had imagined her life would be. She was supposed to grow old with Daniel, watch their children grow up together, build a legacy that spanned decades. Instead, she was starting over, piecing together a new future from the fragments of the old. But maybe that was all right. Maybe life was about adaptation and resilience and finding beauty in unexpected places. January brought bitter cold and more snow. The whole town hunkered down to wait out winter's worst, and Priscilla was grateful for Thomas's continued help. He came by more often now, not just Sundays but sometimes during the week too, checking on them, making sure they had everything they needed. The children started calling him Uncle Thomas, and he took to the role with enthusiasm, teaching young Thomas how to whittle and showing Margaret how to identify different bird tracks in the snow. One afternoon in late January, Priscilla answered a knock on her door to find Mrs. Chen from the boarding house standing there with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Hammond, I hate to bother you, but I heard something in town today that I thought you should know." "What is it?" "Some of the ladies have been talking about Mr. Parker and his visits here. They are saying things, making implications about the nature of your relationship." Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable. "I do not believe a word of it, mind you, but I thought you should be aware." Priscilla felt her face heat with anger and embarrassment. "Let them talk. Thomas has been nothing but kind and respectful. Anyone who suggests otherwise does not know either of us." "I agree completely, but you know how people can be, especially about widows. They think they have a right to judge." Mrs. Chen reached out and squeezed Priscilla's arm. "Just be careful. Small towns have long memories and sharp tongues." After Mrs. Chen left, Priscilla paced the small house, fury making her hands shake. How dare anyone question Thomas's character or her own? They were not doing anything wrong. They were two adults who cared about each other, and there was no shame in that. But she knew Mrs. Chen was right about the danger of gossip. A woman's reputation was fragile, and losing it could mean losing everything. When Thomas came by that evening with more firewood, she told him what Mrs. Chen had said. His jaw tightened with anger. "I am sorry. I did not mean to cause problems for you." "You did not cause anything. Small-minded people did." Priscilla crossed her arms. "But we need to think about this. If the gossip gets worse, it could affect the children. People might treat them differently. Then maybe we should make it official." "What do you mean?" Thomas set down the wood and turned to face her fully. "Marry me, Priscilla. Not because of gossip or what anyone else thinks, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you and your children. I know it is fast, and I know you might need more time, but I am sure about this. I am sure about us." Priscilla stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage. The word felt huge and terrifying and thrilling all at once. She did love Thomas, she realized. Not the same way she had loved Daniel, but that did not make it less real. This was different, built on a foundation of gratitude and respect and genuine affection, forged in the crucible of hardship and survival. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas's face broke into a wide grin, and he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed despite herself, dizzy with emotion. "Are you sure?" he asked when he set her down. "I want you to be sure." "I am sure. Life is too short and too hard to waste time being afraid. I love you, Thomas Parker, and I want to spend whatever time we have together." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and it felt like coming home to a place she had never been before. Behind them, she heard the children stirring, and they broke apart, both flushed and smiling. They were married on a cold February morning at the church in Independence, with the children standing as witnesses and a handful of friends in attendance. Priscilla wore her best dress, mended and pressed, and Thomas wore a new shirt he had bought specially for the occasion. The ceremony was simple and short, but when the preacher said they were husband and wife, Priscilla felt the weight of the past 2 years lift from her shoulders. She was not alone anymore. None of them were. Thomas moved into the little house, and suddenly it felt less cramped and more cozy. He brought his belongings, which were few, and his presence, which was substantial. The children adapted quickly, thrilled to have a father figure again, and Thomas took to the role with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. He still worked at the Patterson Ranch, but now he came home to them every evening, and Priscilla learned to fall asleep next to someone again, to share her space and her life with another person. The gossip died down eventually, replaced by other scandals and concerns. Priscilla did not care either way. She was happy, genuinely happy, in a way she had not thought possible a year ago. Thomas was a good husband and a devoted stepfather. He never tried to replace Daniel in the children's memories, never asked them to forget their first father, but he carved out his own place in their hearts through patience and love. Spring came slowly to the Sierra Nevada, melting the snow inch by inch and revealing the brown earth beneath. Priscilla planted a garden behind the house with Thomas's help, her hands in the soil for the first time in years. The children ran wild in the warming weather, and laughter returned to their home as naturally as birds returning from winter migration. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Thomas put his arm around Priscilla and pulled her close. "I have been thinking," he said. "The Patterson Ranch is doing well, and Mr. Patterson has offered me a supervisor position. It would mean more money, enough to maybe think about getting a bigger place. Somewhere with room for the children to grow, maybe some land of our own." "Really?" Priscilla twisted to look at him. "Thomas, that is wonderful. I wanted to make sure you were on board before I accepted. It would mean longer hours sometimes, more responsibility, but it would also mean security, a real future. Of course I am on board. You have worked so hard for this. You deserve it." She leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and soap and something uniquely him. "We deserve it. We do," he agreed softly. "And I am going to make sure you never have to worry about feeding your children again. I am going to take care of all of you, Priscilla. That is my promise. I know you will. You already have." Summer arrived with warm winds and long days. Thomas took the supervisor position, and they started saving money with a dedication born of shared purpose. The children thrived, growing taller and stronger, their faces losing the haunted look that hunger had etched there. Margaret helped her mother with the younger ones, and young Thomas started working odd jobs around town, determined to contribute like his stepfather. The twins remained inseparable, a matched set of boundless energy and curiosity. In August, Priscilla realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy, fear, wonder, guilt. She had not expected to have more children, had thought that part of her life was over. But here she was at 29, carrying Thomas's child, starting a new chapter she had not planned. When she told him, he looked stunned for a moment, then broke into a smile so bright it made her heart ache. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are having a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy? Priscilla, I am thrilled. I know we did not plan this, and I know it might be hard with 4 children already, but I could not be happier." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This is ours, something we made together." She covered his hand with hers. "I am happy too, and scared, but mostly happy." The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones, perhaps because she was not carrying the weight of grief along with the child. Thomas fussed over her constantly, making sure she rested and ate properly, and the children were excited about having a new sibling. They spent the fall preparing, fixing up a corner of the main room to serve as a nursery, collecting baby things from neighbors and friends. In November, on a night when the first snow was falling outside, Priscilla went into labor. Thomas rode for the midwife while Margaret kept her mother company, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. The labor was long but not terrible, and when dawn broke over the mountains, Thomas and Priscilla's son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to everyone in the house. Thomas held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect, absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Priscilla asked, exhausted but glowing. Thomas looked at her, then at the baby, then at the 4 children clustered around the bed. "What about Daniel, after the children's father, so they know we honor his memory?" Priscilla felt tears prick her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. He gave you these beautiful children, and he was part of making you the woman I love. He deserves to be remembered." So baby Daniel joined the family, and the little house that had once felt too empty now felt perfectly full. Thomas proved himself to be a natural father, walking the floor with the baby at night so Priscilla could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, making silly faces to coax out smiles. The older children doted on their little brother, and even young Thomas, who had been resistant to fully accepting Thomas as a replacement for his father, seemed to soften watching him care for the baby. Winter came again, but this time it held no terror. The pantry was stocked, the firewood piled high, and they had each other. On Monday mornings, Priscilla sometimes thought about that first flour sack appearing on her porch, about how desperate she had been and how far they had come. Thomas had saved her life in every way that mattered, but more than that, he had taught her that it was possible to love again, to build something new from ruins, to find joy after grief. By spring, they had saved enough for a down payment on a small property at the edge of town. It had a house bigger than their current one, with real bedrooms and a proper kitchen, plus a barn and 10 acres of land. Thomas planned to keep working at the Patterson Ranch while starting to build up their own small herd of cattle. It was ambitious, but they were both used to hard work, and they had something precious to work for. A future they were creating together. Moving day was chaos, with children running everywhere and boxes piled high and neighbors stopping by to help and offer congratulations. By evening they were exhausted but settled into their new home, and Priscilla stood in the kitchen looking around in wonder. She had a real stove. She had cupboards. She had windows that looked out at their own land stretching toward the mountains. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I am thinking about how much has changed. 2 years ago I was starving and desperate and alone. Now I have all this." She gestured at the house, at the children playing in the next room, at the baby asleep in his cradle. "I have you. And I have you. Best thing that ever happened to me was finding out you needed help, gave me an excuse to be part of your life. You could have just introduced yourself like a normal person. I could have, but I was too nervous. You were so beautiful and you looked so sad, and I did not know how to approach you without seeming forward." He kissed her neck. The flower seemed like a safer option. Priscilla laughed and turned in his arms to face him. "I am glad you left that first sack on my porch. I am glad you kept coming back. I am glad for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led us here." "Me too." They stood together in their new kitchen as the sun set, painting everything golden, and Priscilla felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was not the life she had imagined when she married Daniel at 18. It was better and worse and more complicated and infinitely precious. She had learned that love came in different forms, that grief could coexist with joy, that strength sometimes looked like accepting help from a stranger on a frozen Monday morning. The years that followed were full and busy. Thomas built up their small ranch with patient determination, and Priscilla managed the household and raised the children with the same fierce competence she had shown during those desperate winter months. They had another baby 2 years after Daniel, a daughter they named Emma, and then one more son 3 years after that, whom they called James. 7 children made for a noisy, chaotic household, but it was also filled with love and laughter, and the kind of stability Priscilla had feared she would never have again. Margaret grew into a thoughtful young woman who wanted to be a teacher. Young Thomas, now called Tom to distinguish him from his stepfather, took to ranching like he was born to it and became Thomas's right hand on the property. The twins remained close, though Sarah proved to have a gift for music and Samuel for mathematics. Baby Daniel grew into a happy toddler and then a curious boy, and Emma and James added their own personalities to the family mix. Through it all, Thomas and Priscilla's partnership deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, supported each other through hard times and celebrated the good ones, and built a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine affection. They were not perfect. They argued sometimes about money or discipline or whose turn it was to deal with a particular crisis. But they always came back together, always remembered that they were on the same team, always chose each other. One Monday morning in early spring, years after that first flour sack appeared on her porch, Priscilla was in the kitchen making bread when Thomas came in from checking the cattle. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back into his embrace, her flour-covered hands still working the dough. "What is the occasion?" she asked. "No occasion. I just wanted to hold my wife." "Well, your wife is covered in flour and sweaty from baking. I do not mind." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever think about that first winter, when things were so hard?" "Sometimes. Mostly I try to focus on how far we have come instead of how bad it was." "I think about it a lot," Thomas admitted. "I think about how close I came to never meeting you, to just leaving things alone because I was too scared to reach out. What would have happened if I had not left that flour?" Priscilla set down the dough and turned in his arms, cupping his face in her floury hands. "But you did leave it. You kept leaving it every Monday until I caught you, and then you kept showing up, kept being there until you became part of our family. That is what matters. I just want you to know that I do not take any of this for granted. You, the children, this life we have built. I am grateful every single day. So am I." She kissed him softly. "Now let me finish this bread before the children come in demanding lunch." He laughed and released her, but not before stealing another kiss. As he headed back outside, Priscilla returned to her dough, a smile playing at her lips. She thought about the woman she had been that winter, desperate and proud and so very tired. She wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that help was coming in the form of a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart. But maybe that woman had needed to go through the darkness to appreciate the light that followed. The bread rose and baked, filling the kitchen with its warm, yeasty scent, and the children came running when she called them for lunch. They crowded around the table, talking over each other, arguing and laughing and being beautifully, wonderfully alive. Thomas came in and took his seat at the head of the table, and Priscilla sat at the other end, and she looked at all of them and felt her heart swell with love so fierce it almost hurt. This was her family. This was her life. Not perfect, but real and hard-won and absolutely precious. After lunch, she found Thomas in the barn mending a piece of tack. She sat beside him on a hay bale and watched his capable hands work. "Tom wants to start courting the Miller girl," she said. "He asked if he could invite her for supper on Sunday. What did you tell him?" "I said I would talk to you first, but I think it would be fine. She seems like a nice girl." Thomas nodded. "He is 18 now, old enough to start thinking about his future. Does not seem possible that the little boy I met that first day is almost a man." "None of them stay little long enough," Priscilla agreed. "Margaret will be getting married soon too, I think. That young man from the mercantile has been making eyes at her for months. That is how it goes, I suppose. We raise them up and then we have to let them go build their own lives." He set down the tack and took her hand. "At least we will still have each other when the house gets quiet again. And the little ones. We have years yet before they are all grown, true, and maybe some grandchildren to spoil along the way." They sat together in comfortable silence, the barn warm from the spring sunshine streaming through the open doors. Somewhere outside, children were playing, their voices high and happy. In the house, bread was cooling on the counter and stew was simmering on the stove. The cattle were fat and healthy in the pastures, and the garden was already showing the first green shoots of new growth. It was an ordinary moment on an ordinary day, the kind that made up the fabric of a life. But Priscilla had learned not to take ordinary moments for granted. She had learned that they were actually the most extraordinary things of all. Proof that you had survived, that you had built something lasting, that you had found your way through the darkness into the light. That evening, after supper and after the children were in bed, she and Thomas sat on their porch watching the stars come out over the mountains. He had his arm around her, and she had her head on his shoulder, and they did not need to say anything because they had said it all before and would say it all again. This was enough. Being together, being home, being alive. "I love you," Thomas said quietly. "I love you too." And under the vast California sky, in the house they had built together, surrounded by the children they were raising and the life they had fought for, Priscilla felt completely and utterly at peace. The widow who could not feed 5 mouths that winter was gone, transformed into a wife and mother and partner who knew her own strength. The cowboy who left flour on her porch every Monday had become the foundation of her world, the steady presence she leaned on and trusted absolutely. They had found each other in the depths of hardship and built something beautiful from that desperate beginning. And whatever the future held, whatever challenges or joys lay ahead, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else, with courage and grace and the unshakable conviction that love in all its forms was worth fighting for. The years continued to roll by, marked by seasons and celebrations and the small daily triumphs that make up a well-lived life. Tom married his sweetheart and built a house on the far corner of their property, taking over more of the ranch operations as Thomas's joints began to ache on cold mornings. Margaret became a teacher in town and married her mercantile clerk, giving Priscilla her first grandchild when she was 40. The twins went their separate ways, Sarah to San Francisco to study music and Samuel to university to become an engineer. But they came home for holidays and never lost their special connection. The younger children grew up knowing only security and love, never experiencing the desperate hunger that had marked their older siblings' early years. They thrived in ways that made Priscilla's heart full, became confident and capable adults who went into the world knowing they had a home to return to whenever they needed it. Through it all, the ranch prospered. What had started as 10 acres and a handful of cattle grew into a respected operation, known for quality stock and fair dealing. Thomas's reputation as an honest, hard-working man opened doors, and his partnership with Priscilla, who proved to have a sharp head for business, made them successful beyond what either had imagined possible. But success was not measured only in acres or cattle or money in the bank. It was measured in Sunday dinners with 3 generations around the table, in grandchildren who ran through the house bringing chaos and joy, in the way Thomas still reached for Priscilla's hand after 30 years of marriage, in the deep contentment that came from building something lasting together. On Priscilla's 50th birthday, the family gathered to celebrate. The house was full of people and noise and laughter. And as she looked around at her children and their spouses, at her grandchildren playing in the yard, at Thomas standing beside her still handsome despite the gray in his hair and the lines on his face, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Margaret asked, coming to stand beside her mother. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we all are." "We almost lost you that winter," Margaret said quietly. "I was old enough to understand how bad things were. I remember being so scared, Mama. And then the flower started appearing, and you started smiling again, and Uncle Thomas came into our lives, and everything changed." "He saved us," Priscilla agreed. "But I think maybe we saved him too. He told me once that he had been searching for purpose, for family, for a place to belong. We gave him that as much as he gave us security. That is what love does, I think. It saves us from ourselves, from loneliness, from all the ways the world tries to break us." Margaret hugged her mother. "I am glad you found each other. I am glad you were brave enough to let him in." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Priscilla and Thomas sat in their bedroom, a room they had shared for nearly 3 decades, preparing for bed. Thomas was brushing out her hair, something he had done for her since their wedding night, and she watched him in the mirror. "You know what I realized today?" she asked. What is that? We have been together longer than Daniel and I were. This life with you has become my primary life, not the one I had before. Does that make me a terrible person? Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering. I think it makes you human. You loved Daniel, and you honored him by raising his children and keeping his memory alive. But you were also young when you lost him, and you had so many years ahead of you. It would have been a tragedy for you to spend them alone. He set down the brush and put his hands on her shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Daniel would want you to be happy. Any man who truly loved you would want that. I think so too, and I am happy, Thomas, profoundly, deeply happy. You gave me that. We gave each other that, he corrected gently. That is how the best partnerships work. They climbed into bed, and Priscilla curled into his side the way she had done thousands of nights before. His heart beat steady beneath her ear, and his arm was solid around her shoulders, and she drifted off to sleep feeling safe and cherished and home. The following Monday morning, out of habit more than anything else, Priscilla woke early and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. As she passed the front door, she glanced out at the porch and stopped, a smile spreading across her face. There, sitting in the same spot where that first flower sack had appeared all those years ago, was a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a ribbon. Thomas appeared behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her neck. "Happy Monday," he murmured. "You are still leaving me gifts." "Always. As long as I live, I will always leave you something to find on Monday morning. It is my way of remembering where we started, of being grateful for everything that came after." Priscilla turned in his arms and kissed him properly, pouring 30 years of love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, she was crying, but they were happy tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the flowers, for the flower, for everything, for choosing us." "Thank you for letting me," he replied, "for opening your door and your heart and your life, for giving me a family and a purpose and a reason to get up every morning. You are my whole world, Priscilla Parker. You always will be." And there, in the doorway of their home, with the sun rising over the mountains and a new day spreading before them like an unwritten page, they held each other and remembered that first desperate winter when a widow could not feed 5 mouths, and a cowboy left flour on her porch every Monday. They remembered, and they were grateful, and they looked forward to whatever Mondays still lay ahead, knowing they would face them together. The story of how they found each other became family legend, told and retold to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a testament to the power of kindness and the resilience of the human heart. It was a story about survival and second chances, about finding love in unexpected places and building something beautiful from the ruins of grief. But more than that, it was a story about 2 people who chose each other every single day, who worked together to create a life of meaning and joy, who proved that sometimes the best love stories start with nothing more than a simple act of compassion and the courage to keep showing up. Years later, long after both Thomas and Priscilla had passed into memory, their descendants would still gather at the ranch on Monday mornings, and there would always be someone who left a small bouquet of wildflowers on the porch, keeping the tradition alive. It was their way of honoring the love that had started their family, of remembering that hard times could be overcome, and that sometimes all it took to change someone's life was a sack of flour and the willingness to care. The land endured, the family grew, and the story lived on, proof that love, once planted in good soil and tended with patience and devotion, could grow into something that lasted forever. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Thomas and Priscilla left behind. Not just the ranch or the children or the material things they had built, but the example of what 2 people could create when they chose kindness, when they chose each other, when they chose to believe that even in the darkest winter, spring would eventually come. Their love had been forged in hardship and tempered by time, and it had proven strong enough to carry not just them but generations after them. It had been the foundation on which everything else was built, the bedrock that held firm through storms and struggles and all the inevitable challenges of life. And it had all started with flour on a porch, a widow's desperation, and a cowboy's compassion. From such small beginnings, great things could grow. From such simple acts of kindness, love could bloom. And from such unexpected encounters, families could be born that would last long after the original players had exited the stage. The story ended not with death or separation, but with continuity, with the knowledge that what Thomas and Priscilla had created together would ripple outward through time, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring love in hearts that had not yet begun to beat. They had taken the worst moment of their lives and transformed it into the beginning of something beautiful, and that transformation was the real miracle. In the end, they had both saved each other. The widow had given the cowboy a family and a home. The cowboy had given the widow hope and a future. Together, they had built a life that mattered, raised children who went on to do the same, and left behind a legacy of love that would endure as long as there were people to remember their story. And every Monday morning, somewhere in California, someone would think of them and smile, remembering the simple truth at the heart of their tale. That love could be found in the most unlikely places, that kindness was never wasted, and that sometimes the greatest romance of all was the one that started with nothing more than flour on a porch and two lonely hearts finding their way to each other through the darkness of winter into the light of spring.